very good day to one and all who have joined us today. Our honorable guest, Padma Bhushan Professor Ved P. Nanda, Professor Dr. Raman Mittal, Professor in charge of Campus Law Center, Dr. Seema Singh, Faculty Convener of Debate and Discussion Society, respected faculty members, guests, students, and all the viewers and audience. A very warm welcome to today's lecture on the topic Migrants and Refugees Challenges for International Law and Policy, delivered by none other than Padma Bhushan Professor Ved P. Nanda, a world renowned jurist, academician, teacher, scholar, and an international leader. On behalf of Campus Law Center and Debate and Discussion Society, I, Kajal Sonkar, student convener of DDS, extend our gratitude and regards to Mr. Nanda for gracing us with his esteemed presence. To welcome our guest and to deliver his welcome address, I would like to open the floor to our professor in charge, Dr. Raman Mittal. I yield the floor to you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Most respected Professor Ved P. Nanda, Dr. Seema Singh, my colleagues and dear students, it is my proud privilege to welcome Padma Bhushan Professor Nanda, who has kindly consented to talk to us this evening. Professor Nanda has distinguished himself by his scholarship and also by his philanthropic deeds. We are indeed lucky to have you, sir, with us. I would like to tell you a small story in order to offer my welcome remarks on a topic which is so interesting and for every law student and lawyer, particularly the one who wishes to deal in international law. More than 1,000 years ago, when the all-invading armies from Arab attacked the ancient kingdom of Persia, which is present-day Iran, some Persians, in order to save themselves and their faith, left their own country and took to the seas. Their unsafe boats landed in Sanjan, which is a port in the Indian state of Gujarat. The high priest of the immigrants sent his representative to the king, Jadhav Rana, who ruled over that part of the country in those days. India was divided into various states, some small, some big, right? So Jadhav Rana was a king in that part of the country in those days. So the representative of the Persians who reached Sanjan in unsafe boats, he went to the court of the king and wanted an audience. The king gave him a patient hearing. The representative explained how they were driven away from their own country, and they have been lucky. A few of them have been lucky to have come over to the place and requested for asylum. But the king did not say either yes or no. The representative of the Parsis requested for an answer again, but the king would not speak. Instead, the wise king gave a pitcher full of milk to the representative and asked, "Please hand it over to your high priest, to your leader." The representative asked for an answer again, but to no avail. The representative returned to the boats with a grim look. When he handed over the pitcher full of milk, it was full to the brim to the high priest. The priest took it and added a spoonful of sugar in it and ordered the representative to go to the court again and return the jug to the king, which the representative obediently did. The king took back the jug and tasted the milk. It was sweet. The king said, "You and your people are welcome in my country. Henceforth, this will be your land as it is mine." Well, what communication was going on between the two leaders? When the king sent the jug full of milk, he meant to say that we are nice people. We are hospitable people in India, but we are so full, and therefore we have no space for you. So it was a kind of regret by the king. But the high priest of the Persians, of the Parsis, by mixing a spoonful of sugar in it, said symbolically that we don't need any space really. हमें जगह चाहिए ही नहीं. If you permit, we will mix with you people, and with our hard work and loyalty, we will only improve the quality of life in your country. Well, that is exactly what the Parsis have done. They're the smallest minority in India. Even then, they have enriched the Indian economy. They even fought in the independence movement along with Mahatma Gandhi against the British rule. The major industrialists like Tata's, Godrej, Naurozi's, they are amongst the most well-known industrialists. They are all Parsis. India can never repay the contribution of Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha. We all know that. And look at the contribution of Jamshedji Nasirwanji Tata. Pandit Nehru used to call him one-man planning commission of India. Whatever reforms J.N. Tata introduced in his companies, in his factories, the first Prime Minister of India, Nehru, used to make them into labor laws. In keeping with their promise made to King Jadhav Rana 1,000 years back at the time of being provided shelter, the Parsis have endeavored to sweeten the country by their good deeds. So, my dear friends, modern international law has prescribed duties for countries with respect to refugees and immigrants, and also rights for the refugees and immigrants. But I feel that it goes both ways, as we have seen in the story of Parsis. With these remarks, I welcome Professor Ved Nanda again. Thank you so much, sir, for agreeing to address us. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Raman sir, for that captivating story. It is my privilege and honor to have been given this opportunity for introducing Professor Nanda. It would take me an entire keynote to justify the might and legend of Professor Ved Nanda, but I treat this path with very carefully without not taking much of the time. Professor Nanda, John Evans Distinguished University Professor and Thompson G. Marsh Professor of Law at University of Denver, Honorary President of World Jurist Association, President of World Association of Law Professors, Director of American Society of Comparative Law. Professor Nanda is one of the most decorated jurists of our times, who has been duly recognized by governments and organizations across the world. To name a few, he is the recipient of Padma Bhushan, Louis B. Sohn Award for Public International Law from American Bar Association, Gandhi King Ikeda Award for Community Peace Building, World Legal Scholar Award by the World Jurist Association, United Nations Association Human Rights Award, Hiroshima Peace Award, and the list goes on and it's never ending. Ladies and gentlemen, brace yourselves for a riveting lecture by the pinnacle of international law jurisprudence, the legend himself, Professor Ved P. Nanda. I yield the floor to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very generous introduction. And Professor Mittal, Professor Vandana, and Professor who has been for many months and years now that have come a couple times, been in touch, Professor Seema Singh, and all these students. I am delighted to be with you, honored to be with you. It's a privilege to be with you. Just like you, I sat in those chairs and those seats at the University of Denver, Delhi University, and a faculty of law. And those were wonderful years that I spent there. So I envy you that you are there on the campus, in the campus center, and I wish you the very best. Professor Mittal, it really was a captivating story. But that story is a story of India. It's a story of very generous and gracious people. It's a story that not simply welcomed Parsis, but long before that, even, it welcomed Christians who had come. It welcomed Jews who had come. And along with that, now you have welcomed even those people who had to leave Tibet and come there. And I have seen McLeodganj, and I have been there with those people. And, it's absolutely amazing how all these centuries you have welcomed people, and welcomed people, embraced them, and you have given a very clear message to people who are different. And that message is that it's not simply tolerating differences, because when you tolerate, you simply are saying, well, I'm superior and I accept, tolerate you. But you have accepted people, you have respected people who are different. And throughout these centuries, India's attitude toward those who have come from abroad, who look different, has been absolutely amazing. And that's where I want to begin this story today about refugees and about migrants. First of all, numbers. I was going to put it on the screen, but I don't think there is any need. There are almost 280 million people. Think about it, 280 million people, almost one fourth of India's population, that at the present time is not living in his or her own country. And along with that, unfortunately, there are 26.3 million refugees. Think about refugees, people leaving their country not on their own because they are being persecuted. And I'll talk about who is a refugee under the law. But these are the people who are vulnerable: children, women, older people, and leaving their home and leaving all behind and looking for a place where they can get shelter, where they can at least be accommodated somehow. And then doors are closed, barricades are built, no welcome sign, unlike India, which had welcomed all those people. These people today in Europe, in America, in all these countries that are well off. And I can't really at the present time think about developing countries and India still being one of them, and to open the doors to thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people, because at the present time, most developing countries need to take care of their own people also. And so I can't fault them. But I do talk about United States, I can talk about Britain, I can talk about Canada, I can talk about Europe, I can talk about Japan, the countries that are well off. And even today, they are not permitting refugees to come in. I'll talk in a minute about the law, on refugee law and policy. Many, many years ago, I did a book, and then I've been writing about it. But there are plenty of people who have done that kind of work. And it's not simply refugees that you have to think about. There are internally displaced people. These are the people who had to leave their home. They left their part of the country, but they couldn't leave the country to go somewhere else. Either they didn't want to or they couldn't. And these are internally displaced people. You can think about, in India, people who came from Kashmir, and how many years and how many hundreds of thousands who had to leave their home. And I know, because I have seen them when I came back, seen them in Jammu, seen them in Delhi, talked with them. I have sat with them, and I have spoken with them in seminars and in sessions because of their plight, and they finally are being now heard, but their voices are not heard. And then you think about Syria, And you remember that half the country at the present time, half the country's population is practically at this time, either they are refugees or they are internally displaced people. And then think about it, there are more than 4 million people around the world who have no state. And as many of you know, if you are stateless, then you at the present time have practically no rights because nobody owns you. You don't own a country in the sense that you are not a national of a country. And today's world, we are still nation state centered. And you remember that you got a passport. Passport, what does it mean? It simply means that your own country has given you permission to travel, and it gives a message to every country in the world that, look, this is our national. Please support that person, at least give the minimum human rights that anybody should have anywhere because he or she is a human body, human person. But he or she is our national. And so nationality becomes very important. And today, the sad part is that with all these lockdowns, and Corona has brought in great deal of tragedy because people can't travel very much and the doors are closed. There are travel restrictions. People are forced from their homes. And there are millions who have got to leave their homes because of many challenges. And let me mention a few of them because recently what happened is that the United Nations United Nations has done a whole lot of work, but it said that what happens is poverty, armed conflict, food insecurity, persecution, terrorism, human rights violations, and abuses. In this part of the world where I live now, in Latin America, there are countries that at the present time have gangs, and those are the people who recruit these young kids and ask them to be violent and do all kind of criminal activities, drugs, and problems of looting and killing people. And people are afraid of that gang violence and they have got to leave their home. People are hungry, they have got to leave their home. And at the present time, what we call little triangle here in Latin America, close to the United States. And these are the countries that have at the present time lot of problems, and people have got to leave because they cannot feel safe in their own homes. And so they have problems, they have challenges, they want to find a solace. And the United States, for the last 4 years, had closed its borders, not permitted them to come in. And from El Salvador, from all these close countries to the United States, it has been a very, very difficult issue for them. And now there is a problem of climate change, environmental factors. And there is, at the present time, at least there are some studies that say that millions of people might have to leave their homes, sea rise, many small islands, countries might be inundated. For a year, I taught on a visiting distinguished chair at the University of Hawaii. And at that time, I went to all those small islands in the Pacific. And those are the islands that you probably know are barely above the sea level. And some of them are likely to be practically inundated and disappear if the sea rises further. And now that the glaciers are melting now that in Arctic, Antarctic, we see the climate change having very adverse effects. And because of all that, if the sea rises further, there are some countries that at the present time would practically disappear. And some of those islands closer to, not very close, but closer to Australia and New Zealand have been asking Australians, New Zealanders to give them some space and they might move all their people there. So that difficulty has arisen. I think I need to probably begin our journey about what refugee law is and why there is problem. And I'm going to talk primarily about Europe and to see where at the present time problem lies. But I should also mention about, as I mentioned, Syria. And many of those people, millions have left country. And where do they go? They have gone to Jordan. They have gone to Lebanon. They have gone to Turkey. And all these three countries, Jordan and Lebanon especially, they don't have space. They have got their own economic problems. They cannot take care of them. In Turkey, there are millions of them who want to move toward Europe. And then they take difficult journey in the Mediterranean, rickety kind of boats. And there are smugglers who take advantage of them. And these are the people who take money and then they say, we would transport you to Greece. We would transport you to Italy. From Greece and Italy, you can go through Serbia, you can go through other countries and go to Germany, go to Britain, countries that can probably accommodate you. Go to Sweden, go to Norway, go to Denmark, go to the Netherlands. And that is where the problem lies. But let's look at what the refugee law is and why at the present time the refugee system is totally broken. You probably know that what happened is that after the Second World War, Europe was in turmoil. There were refugees who had to leave their homes. And at that time, the refugee system began. And it was in order to take care of those people in Europe who had to leave their homes. Now, move forward and fast forward to today. It's not the same system. It's not Europeans that you're thinking about. And so, under refugee law, what they had simply said, and I want to read to you what the demands are. And demands are that you, as a person, must be persecuted, must feel unsafe, and you have got to show personal, not cumulative, not collective, but personal persecution, that somebody was after you because of your nationality, because of your ethnic setting in which you are. And those are the kind of reasons that you had to leave the country and you can't go back. And you are seeking asylum. And asylum law is a very simple one, that you go to a country, the country should open its doors, the country should give you the opportunity to present your claim. And the claim is going to be that you are persecuted, and because of you are persecuted, you cannot go home. And once you are there, then the law simply is that you should be able to have asylum. And asylum simply means that you have the opportunity to stay in that country, and that country would permit you to have at least some kind of means of livelihood that you might have. So, refugee is the one, and let me read it to you, who has lost the protection of the government of her or his nationality or permanent residence and has fled that particular country seeking refuge and assistance to another country. The persecution of a well founded fear that it's not persecution that you are simply imagining, but well founded fear of persecution and unable to leave the country, then you can just simply be internally displaced. But if you have left the country, and the reason should be race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. And here in this country, we've got immigration judges and people who have been persecuted, for example, in any one of the countries. Maybe it's Afghanistan, maybe it's Syria, maybe it's a country in Africa, Central African Republic, Somalia, Congo, many countries where there are at the present time great deal of problems and challenges. And if they come and they are seeking asylum, then you need to give them a hearing. Find their story, and if the story is credible, and if the reason is appropriate, then you permit them to stay. And then you might permit them also to at least earn a living so they can get a job. After a period of time, they might become national. India, at least in the past, permitted people from Afghanistan, from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, and all those people who were Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs, Parsis, whosoever they were given a special privilege of at least given expedited nationality. And in this country, in the United States, the government did the same thing. Because at one time, when the Soviet Union and now Russia would not permit the Jews to leave the country, then those Jews who could leave the country, the United States opened its doors. Similarly, when people wanted to leave Cuba, the United States opened its doors and embraced them and permitted them. I think Professor Mittal gave a very, very clear indication of how Indian government would embrace people coming from other countries, even if it had its own country being full of people and saying that we don't have room, but still they would accommodate them as they have accommodated over the centuries. Let me briefly mention to you what has happened in Europe. Because these people from Africa, from Afghanistan, from Syria, they wanted to come to Europe because Europe fortunately was well off. And they might say that, perhaps I can better my life, my family's life, if I go to Europe. And so they would somehow reach because of the availability of some resources to go to Turkey or go to Libya, because from Libya you can go to Italy by the ocean, from Turkey you can go to Greece, and also you can probably go to Spain. And once you are in Spain, once you are in Greece, once you are in Italy, then what has happened is that Europe's doors become open. Because once if you are in one country, then there is a Schengen system under which you can travel throughout Europe or many countries of Europe without having any visas and simply your own identity card, and you can travel. And so these people wanted to go to either Greece or Italy or Spain, and from there go to countries that are rich, like Germany, like Sweden. And Germany and Sweden had opened their doors to them. 1 million people in 2015 they came to Europe. Germany opened its doors, Sweden opened its doors, and many countries also welcomed them. But then, over a period of time, compassion fatigue took over. And Greece wanted to close its doors. Italy did not want to have any more. And those people who wanted to go to Australia, they could not get there because Australia had kept its oceans closed to it, the seas not open to them because they would have their own boats and they would keep people away from coming to Australia and put them in a small island. And from there, their lives being in misery. And unfortunately, that situation stayed as it is. But let's go back to Libya and let's go back to Turkey. When Italy didn't want them, Greece didn't want them, and Europe had been trying for a long time in order to have a common European system. And they had felt that if refugees came in one country, then all European Union countries should have burden sharing, that they would help that country take care of them. And then they would also accommodate people from that country in different parts of Europe, and each country might have a little quota. I won't take you through all the details, but that system many, many times tried to reform itself, tried to mend itself. It always has been broken. And even today, after many, many tries, European refugee system is broken and people in Europe are not wanted. And now because of coronavirus, what has happened is that in a country like Hungary, in a country like Poland, in a country like Austria, in a country like Romania. And these are the people who might be put in detention. You may recall or not recall that at one time, when there was Vietnam War, people from Vietnam had to leave in those rickety boats across the ocean, wanting to go to Hong Kong, wanting to get away. And then on the way, robbers preyed on them. People were kidnapped, children died, women, older people perished. And then once they went to Hong Kong put them in kind of tents and camps and barricades around them so they couldn't do anything, they couldn't go anywhere. And that has been the plight of refugees, and that has been plight of the internally displaced people because they are not taken care of. In Syria, that has been the setting for many, many years now. As you remember, 10 years have passed in that war. From Afghanistan, the problems with Taliban, and that has exacerbated the situation of people there. So, what at the present time is happening is that Corona has exacerbated the situation. I was looking at these stories. I don't need to probably take the time to tell you these stories, but they are you feel heartbroken in listening to those stories. I have had students from Somalia, from Afghanistan, from Syria, and to listen to them, what kind of hardships they had, what kind of work they had left behind. For example, one student whose dad was a surgeon in Syria came to the United States. What did he do? He couldn't find anything to do. He knew how to drive, so he was an Uber driver, a surgeon, very well known surgeon, and driving a car and finding a way in order to see that his children can have education. And this was my student in the law school, and said, my dad is surgeon, now is driving a car, trying to see that I can get educated, I can become a lawyer, I can take care of refugees. So that at the present time is the system. And in that system, we don't know how it's going to be mended. The system that was set up was simply for those European refugees. And today, the situation is different. And when you think about people who had to leave their home because of violence, not against them, but violence is endemic in the country. Everyone suffers. But in order to get asylum, you have to show that you were the target, that somebody was coming after you. How do you prove it? I have had here several people from Latin America, several people from other countries like Afghanistan and Syria who have been wanting to take asylum here. And in order to show that they have got being persecuted, the immigration judge has to be shown, proved that it has happened. And as an international lawyer, then I am at times expert witness, talking about that country's situation, speaking with the person, finding out from that person what he or she has suffered. Does she have any newspaper to prove that there were going to be people after him? Was he being persecuted because of religion, because of race, because he belonged to the opposition group? All those kind of possibilities are there that you have got to prove to the judge. And as an expert witness, then I simply not only write articles and books, but I go and appear and help them in order to do that. Here in my state, Colorado, there is a refugee agency, and I served on it for many years in order to provide some kind of assistance to refugees because the state does it, and there is a small group of people that can assist in order to find out how we can assist those people, help those people. And there is one rule, and I won't go into too many, but there is one law in the refugee, one rule in a refugee law, and that is a very basic principle, and that is a non-refoulement. And what it simply means is that if you have got a person appearing before you seeking asylum, and you don't have the wherewithal because he or she may not be able to prove all that, and that person has got to go back, do not send him back. Do not send that person back to the country where he is likely again to be, or she is likely to be persecuted. And that rule has been constantly broken. The second rule, that those countries that are poor and that are taking care of refugees, that the rich countries might help them. There might be some burden sharing. That hasn't helped. That hasn't been done. Promises made, but promises broken. And then there are many international, so many treaties and so many declarations 3-4 years ago, not 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when it was President, not Trump, but in the earlier setting when Biden was the vice president, he made a great deal of effort in order to see that at the United Nations there is a declaration, and declaration agreed to by many countries around the world on a UN at a UN summit. And that declaration was that we'll take care of refugees, we'll do burden sharing, we'll give them at least the opportunity to start a new life. But those declarations, those promises, those treaties, those systems of taking care of refugees are broken. I cannot fault many developing countries because they don't have the opportunity, they don't have the wherewithal to take care of many refugees. But those rich countries that at the present time have the capacity to do so, they have got put all barricades, do not want anyone to come in, and those who come in, they are detained, and those who are come in, they are expelled, and that is at the present time the setting. So where do we go from here? And I can simply speculate that if the system is broken, you have to fix it. And how do you fix it? At this stage, there is no other way but one that these rich countries have to open some of their doors to people who are suffering and who need to come. And these are again pull and push factors. There is a push factor from their own country that they cannot live there peacefully, that because of all the reasons that I gave, they have to leave. And so, in order to see that at least in those countries, there is some peace, there is some tranquility, then there is a responsibility on the rich countries to assist and help. And again, there have been plenty of summits. We had one time Millennium Development Goals from 2000 to 2015. And there the point was that nobody should be poor, that we should try to eradicate poverty. And if nothing else, at least 50% of that problem we should be able to solve. And that from 2015 to 2030 now, there are sustainable development goals. And among those goals is that poverty total eradication, nobody should be left behind. And here, the rich countries, industrialized countries, they have taken the responsibility that because where they are to assume more responsibility to help developing countries. What can they do? Not simply money, but they can at least provide appropriate technology. They can provide some kind of assistance in seeing that people in those countries are educated and trained. And here, for example, in the United States, countries in Latin America that are close to the United States, many of them in pretty bad shape, from which at the present time on the border of the United States with Mexico, there are thousands of people that are trying to knock at the door, trying to come in because they have got relatives in this country. They cannot live in their own country. And unfortunately, the doors here get closed. With President Biden, he has decided that he's going to permit more people to come in because at one time this country used to have about 100,000, close to 100,000 people permitted each year as refugees. For example, those people who had to leave Bhutan came to Nepal, and from Nepal they have been now brought to the United States as refugees. But President Trump had closed the doors. Now Biden is trying to open the doors, but also the Biden administration is trying to see that in these countries closer to the United States, which are in bad shape, that they might be assisted in order to build their capacity to be able to take care of those people so that they don't have to leave their country. And so that effort has begun, but at the present time, the situation is pretty dire. So rich countries have got to open their doors. Rich countries have got to share burden sharing, and rich countries have got to have promises that they had made and not kept fulfilled now. Unfortunately, I cannot leave speaking without providing a grim picture. I wish I could tell you a rosy tale, but I can't. And I can simply tell you that this system that's going on cannot survive. And so in order to make it better world, these two things have got to happen. That in order to meet that goal of sustainable development, which also said, and that's an important goal and we're working on it, that there must be gender equality, that there must be women empowerment, that there must be total eradication of poverty, that kids at the present time, millions and millions of kids who can't go to school, their childhood is gone, all those dreams vanish. And so I'm sorry to leave you with that grim story, but as all of you as students think about the future, kindly think about those vulnerable refugee people and those people who at the present time, especially out of Africa, out of Syria, out of Afghanistan, have been wanting to at least change their own lives. People from Kashmir who for many, many years have been toiling in Bharat, in India. So I hope that you think about them and in your own heart, at least there is some kind of sentiment that as human beings, all of us have got the same human rights. Human rights because you and I are human. And just being a human, we've got certain rights. And Indian tradition is beautiful that along with those rights, you've got some duties as well. And as good global citizens, when you think about your own careers, think about your own future, think about the human rights of all people around the world, and especially of refugees, internally displaced people, and stateless people who are vulnerable. So thank you very much for permitting me to come. I spoke much longer than I wanted to, but please, any comments, any questions?
Thank you so much for the erudite, empowering, and masterful keynote, sir. We are highly privileged to get this opportunity, and we cannot thank you enough for taking time out for this keynote, sir. I am Vijay Pujari, a final year student of Campus Law Center, presently serving as the convener of the Debate and Discussion Society. I am indeed honored to moderate this Q&A session, sir. I wish to begin the session with your permission, sir. Sir, is it sustainable for India to embrace UN standards of refugee laws?
I think the refugee law is there, but at the same time, you probably have heard that I mentioned that developing countries should have a little bit of difficulty because they have difficulty, that developing countries ought not to be seen in the same setting as most of the developed countries. So I think the asylum law, refugee law, it applies to every country. The India has not ratified the um, refugee convention, but refugee convention, the laws of refugees and the laws pertaining to internally displaced people, they apply to everyone because they have become customary international law. But the sad part is that under international law, there is no right of asylum. All that you have is that you can make a petition to seek asylum. And I think the Indian government has been following that.
So, what is your opinion about the Citizenship Amendment Act that we recently passed? Mainly asylum being catered to the religious minorities in neighboring nations.
I think the same thing has happened in this country because we opened our doors to those who are persecuted in Cuba, those who are persecuted in Russia. And so I think a country under international law has the right to decide who comes into the country and on what terms. And international law leaves it to each country to make that decision. And so Indian government, parliament, on its own, once it adopts the law, unless that law violates international human rights, then it is appropriate. And I think under the citizenship law, What India did was it permitted people who are persecuted from three countries to come in order to have expedited citizenship. And I think that, as I mentioned to you, international law leaves to each country to make its own decision as to who comes in, under what terms, and who can stay and who has to leave.
Thank you, sir. So we are taking one public question, sir. Tasneem will be coming up with the next question. Tasneem.
Hello, sir.
Thank you. Hi, Tasneem.
Hello, sir. I hope you're well and healthy. I am a first year student here at Campus Law Center, and I'm sure a lot of first year students will agree with me that today's event has truly been the highlight of our first semester. So thank you very much on behalf of all of us for addressing us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, coming to my question, it's very well recognized that typically internal security is the preoccupation of right-leaning governments, while on the other hand, refugee accommodation is typically a preoccupation of left-leaning governments. But to be honest, we could really set aside this philosophy as purely theoretical because real politics shows us that a government of any dispensation needs to find a medium, a happy medium and a balance between internal security and taking in refugees on humanitarian grounds. So, sir, I seek your kind opinion on how can nations work towards striking this delicate balance? Thank you.
Tasneem, you gave the answer yourself, and your answer was absolutely right that you've got to provide a balance, and that obviously each government, each country has got to use its own procedures to do that. And I think, as you probably know, that under the UN Charter, Article 27 of the UN Charter says that many internal issues are the ones on which there should be no interference from abroad. And sitting here in the US, I'm not going to pass any judgment on what the Indian government does. But the Indian government is the one that, at least what I have seen, has tried to keep that balance. And that balance is that security becomes important. And under international law and all refugee law, also, especially, security becomes an issue that a country can take into consideration in making any decisions pertaining even to refugees. And so long as the country does not abuse that discretion, I think that would be acceptable and that would be considered to be appropriate.
Thank you, sir. Ria Tivatia would be coming with the next question.
So my question was that some academics argue that migrant workers complement the existing labor force rather than compete, and that the economy benefits where there is higher immigration. What is your take on this, sir? Will migrants steal our job or not?
I think it'll again, unfortunately, depend on each country. For example, if you're asking about my country, where I live now, the United States, you're absolutely right. Although there are people here in this country who would not permit many migrants to come in, but we have seen study after study in this country that migrants have added, migrants have paid dues, migrants have done more for the country than keeping them out. This is a country of immigrants. At the present time, people from India that came here, they are exceptionally good at the present time as entrepreneurs. If you look at the Silicon Valley, in Silicon Valley, it's Indians that dominate at the present time. They're all migrants. They came in, they pitched in, they created at the present time those dot coms. They are the ones who are at the present time at the pinnacle of their power because of their own efforts and because of who they are. So, immigrants in this country, for example, are the ones who have built this country. So, they don't take away anything. And at the present time, people even from Latin America, Mexico, other places that want to come in, and there are some who would like to close the doors. But these studies, number of them show that even these people who come in and who are not literate, who are not even at the present time adding to the intellectual power of this country, but even they add a whole lot. But again, as I mentioned, it's going to depend on countries. There are countries at the present time that really cannot accommodate. For example, I mentioned to you Lebanon, I mentioned to you Jordan, and Lebanon and Jordan, coming from Syria, those people, they have opened their doors, but those migrants, they are not adding in those countries. They are stealing the jobs. And so the need is for rich countries to help Lebanon, to help Jordan, in order to make sure that these migrants who come in can be accommodated.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you, sir. Akshita is coming with the next question, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Hi,
Sir,
Akshita.
good evening, sir. Sir, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees defined refugees as someone who is in a fear of ill treatment for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, etc. Sir, in this 21st century, where people are fighting for human rights and freedom of race and religion, should there be any more cases or incidents leading to the making of new refugees?
I think the point simply is that, unfortunately, as you probably know, that it's very, very hard in order to change any law which is going to have adverse impact upon countries. And when you talk about a refugee law, in order to bring about any change so that there should be more refugees based on economic considerations or based upon climate issues, I think that ought to be changed. But unfortunately, treaty won't help because countries are not going to be willing to accept a modification, amendment of the current refugee law. So what can be done is that you've got to accommodate them. I would not worry about changing the law. I would not worry about saying that you call them refugees, because even the UN High Commissioner for Refugee, that you have mentioned the reasons that people can seek asylum, even they, the office of that High Commissioner, is going to be taking care of people who are not legally refugees because they need to be taken care of. So I think your answer to that would be that not necessarily under the law, but under humanitarian conditions, it's a good idea to at least permit some people who are not falling in many of those categories, but still should be taken care of.
Thank you, sir. We have Simarjot coming with next question.
Hi.
Good evening, sir. Sir, today liberal and progressive refugee laws help provide a safe passage to the incoming refugees, but the natives do see them as a threat to their culture, and due to which a majority of refugees feels continues to feel repelled and subjugated. So, what can local governments do to address their social and financial inclusion to ensure not just safe passage but also safe space?
Very good. I think you're absolutely right. The question becomes, let me give you an example. Example would be Turkey and Germany. Many Turkish people have gone to Germany. And then Germans say that you have come with a different culture. Can you be assimilated into our culture? And that is really where the issue comes up. Do you want to make it a soup, or do you want to keep it as a bowl in which you have got all this kind of different vegetables put together, and they still live together, but they're wonderful because they taste good? So that is the issue, that whether you need people to be totally assimilating to your culture, or you can at least have some basics that they need to know, that they might know the language, that they might know at least the culture that was there when they came in, that their own culture should enrich the culture that was there. In India, you have assimilated all kinds of people. over the centuries. They are here in India. They keep their own religion, they keep their own culture, but at the same time enriches the culture of everyone. And in this country, in the United States, there's a great deal of effort in order to see that we don't look at each other at zero sum game, that they should be accommodating each other. And that is where I think the important part that you implicitly kind of mentioned, that people have to be taught from the beginning, even before kindergarten. At the very, very beginning, they have got to be taught about human rights. Human rights should be from the very beginning, from parents to teachers, in order to say that different people who look different, culture different, that you don't need to look at them and say that they are not to be even tolerated. Live with them, accept them, respect them.
Yes, sir. Shishir with next question, sir.
So my question is again based on climate change. So as we talked about, the climate change is becoming a real life crisis now, and in fact, World Bank have predicted that there will be close to 150 million migrants from only three regions, that is Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia by 2050. Especially taking view of South and Southeast Asia, how do you feel the capabilities of the nation in this region to manage this impending crisis along with the acute poverty that is present in this area? Also, sir, what role do you see India playing in next 3 to 4 decades for this migrant crisis, considering that it will itself be dealing with those climate changes acutely?
You know, you have raised a very, very important issue. And on climate change, I've done some work, and you and I can take about an hour to talk about it. But I think the issue that you have raised is a good one. So, what's the answer at the present time? The answer, first of all, is that whatever we can do at this stage, we need to prevent the total collapse. That might be emission standards, that might be at the present time the climate change treaty, and then protocols and all that is happening. And it's going to be next um, um, time that the countries meet is going to come pretty soon. They have set targets. Targets are not being reached. And I'm very pleased to tell you that in this country, cities, states, universities, they have taken the lead, not the federal government itself, because federal government in the last 4 years was kind of a denial on climate change. Now Biden has changed it. Kerry, who was the former Secretary of State, is going to be the climate czar in a way, and he is taking very, very active steps in order to fight climate change. So the first thing has to be done, prevention, as much as we can do at the present time to see that we take care of the climate. Second would be that you are absolutely right. Many Asian countries, developing countries, won't be able to deal with it. And to ask them to deal with that issue is going to be again illusory. If they have got to deal with this issue, then I think that burden sharing by rich countries has got to come. So it's a very difficult question to answer. We don't know what the future holds. I hope that there are not those 150 million refugees. I hope that that is simply a scenario that is the worst scenario, and it won't come to pass. And once it does, then I think we'll have to deal with it. And I think if these refugees in Asian countries have got to be accommodated, I don't know how, without rich countries' help, they can take care of it. So I think at this stage it's all speculative. And let us hope, not simply in a very naive kind of way, but in a way that is rational, that we can be wise, and we can at least take steps at the present time to avoid that kind of catastrophe that you have mentioned. I hope that we can do that. If we don't, then I think the future is bleak, as you implicitly mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for patiently taking each and every question. Now I request Dr. Seema Singh for closing remarks and a vote of thanks.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was indeed a very insightful lecture, and you have discussed almost everything regarding the problem of refugees and migrants. And obviously, it is a very serious issue, and I think world need to work together to address the reasons behind rising number of unrest and conflicts in the world, which is primarily responsible for this migrants and refugee problem. But I think, sir, in this whole discussion, there are several questions which has been raised for the international community as well. Like, world community need to contemplate seriously about the effectivity of international law now. Is international law and international organizations are honest enough in their efforts to handle these issues? Internal conflict of the interest of rising due to increasing number of refugees and internal illegal migrants. Threat, one student has raised a very valid question. Threat to peace and security which is going to be caused due to these refugees to a particular country. That is again a very pertinent question, because some serious issues has been raised, and we have seen some serious issues which European countries are basically going to face. So if the system, as you said very rightly, if the system is broken, we need to fix it. Sincere and collective effort is obviously required across the globe to solve this problem of humanity, which humanity is going to face across the globe. Sustainable development goals, if could be achieved, can solve the problem up to a certain extent. As of now, we don't have any concrete solution of this problem, and we need to explore it. Right of the refugees should be protected, and simultaneously, refugees should also assimilate with the culture to the country where they are going to take refuge, and they should contribute for the betterment of the country, very much like Parsis have done in India. With this concluding remarks, sir, I will extend my big thanks to you on the behalf of the Campus Law Center and DDS Society, and I will also extend my thanks to Professor Raman Mittal, to all the students of this DDS committee, and especially to Vijay and Kajal. And I will congratulate all the students who have asked very pertinent and very relevant question related with this refugee problem. With this, once again, I extend my thanks to you, and we will invite you again for some other lecture on other relevant topic very soon, as we have discussed earlier. Thank you.
But thank you very much. I want to thank again Professor Mittal, Seema ji, you, and those who asked questions and those who came. And my only wish is that all your students, they thrive, they prosper, and at the present time, when I think about them, not only they work for themselves, but work for the country and work for humanity. And I know that you have been instilling those values in them, and my very, very best to each one of them. Professor Mittal, I'm grateful for your very kind invitation, and I wish that I could be there in person. And I enjoyed last time that I was with you, and I enjoyed your students, enjoyed the faculty. Kindly give my warmest regards to all of them, and my very best wishes, and namaste.
Thank you very much, sir. Namaste. Namaste.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.